Hello. It's nice to see you all. This is a terrific panel. We have more brains than time here, so people are going to have to be very efficient. But I think the backdrop to this discussion is evident to everybody. It's a growing fear and skepticism about artificial intelligence, what it's doing and potentially doing to jobs and employment, the threats to privacy and autonomy, the wide-ranging social consequences, and that's without even getting into all of the science fiction scenarios, which we can do or not do as you prefer. But I know this is a group of people that is going to stress positive aspects that counterpoise all of those concerns. And they've all been introduced. I want to give everybody a chance to open up with a couple of minutes to talk about what some of the positive things coming out of AI are, and then we'll mix it up as time allows. So why don't we start with the Xprize?
Sure.
Marcus.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. One of the perspectives I don't think gets enough dialogue is the amount of invention and innovation that AI affords to individuals, and that propagation of innovation is something that the world hasn't experienced. And so the question would be, in terms of AI for good, would be if we have this technology that's being democratized down to where an individual can access and use AI versus just big governments or big labs, does it create a world in which we get enough rapid experimentation and innovation towards solving problems that actually becomes accretive to solving those problems? And so one of the upsides, more optimistic view is, unless it falls under the actors, somewhat nefarious actors, will citizens of the world start to use this technology to invent, and it's permitting us to invent more. And it's providing us the autonomy to invent more, and will that lead to enough rapid experimentation that gets us to a better place than we would otherwise? And in that case, it could be a very good thing as we enter this renaissance of innovation as a result of this one technology.
Yeah. George, you're next, but I want to ask you a specific question, which is, are there categories of jobs that we're not thinking about that are going to come out of the next generation of AI technology? We understand the jobs that are going to be lost, but do we understand the jobs that could be gained?
Well, it's not just jobs that are lost or gained, but it's also just jobs that are just improved by the use of AI. So one good example of this is what Kespry does in industrial work. In industrial work, we have scenarios where there's dangerous activities going on a construction work site, where there's dangerous activities where literally people are falling off roofs, falling off mine sites. And in most of these cases, a drone, in the case we're being used in most of these industrial scenarios, can really make the safety factor of how you get work accomplished in a more seamless manner. And so one of the things that we've been really working on is not only just to make it safe to get these dangerous work sites really better accomplished with a drone, but it's also improving the productivity of that labor. So in the case of our drones being used for the recovery efforts around the recent hurricanes in the US, it turns out that roofers, and particularly the roof assessments that are accomplished, are now 10x more productive with the use of drones than without drones.
How should we be thinking about it from a political and regulatory perspective?
Yes, I would actually jump to your last question. There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, robots taking the jobs of people, and of course the politicians are very much afraid of that. But actually the data so far doesn't show that. And what is really interesting about these technologies is that if we look back to the history, then we see when some kind of machines were invented and taken into use, then we had the same predictions, but it didn't go that way. What the futurologists really foresaw the technology, what they didn't foresee is how human behavior changes over time. So your question, what are the new jobs? We don't know what the new jobs are because we only look at the picture we have in front of us now. The new jobs, the jobs that we had in the 16th century, 95% of people worked in agriculture. Now in US, the percentage is less than 2. So if you would have told to the people of the 16th century that, in 2017 only less than 2% work in agriculture, probably everybody would go like, no, 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 don't allow this, but we have new jobs that these people didn't foresee.
But here the issue is quantity of jobs, not just quality of jobs. Certainly we will have some number of very high quality jobs connected with AI. The question is whether we can maintain something resembling the quantity of jobs we've had.
True, but then we also have the discussion about maybe we shouldn't use the word jobs because it's outdated. If we have more and more talk about the universal income and like that people have something to do. There's this good Chinese proverb that says that happiness is when you have something to do, someone to love, and something to wait for. So as long as people have something to do, then they're happy. But of course, so far it has been related to having a job.
Anthony, you can bring up whatever point you want.
Yeah, I feel like that's a little loud. Yeah, so I think that the real issue is going to be that there's great potential for AI to transform society in a positive way, and it really boils down to a societal decision to make use of the benefits that we could potentially have from that. So you bring up the idea that we have the potential to all get the same amount of work done with a lot less time. Now in Europe, I think there is a sort of already some societal agreement that you share the proceeds of this kind of bounty. And in the United States, at least at this point, we do not yet seem to have a societal agreement that if there's more stuff being made, then maybe everybody should benefit from that. So I think it really is going to boil down to how we reorganize our society. And that looks like it's going, at least right now, in very different ways in the United States from Europe.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little from a social policy perspective. You have two overlapping questions. One is how income is distributed, but another is about work. And this idea that is very fashionable in Silicon Valley about a guaranteed income or a basic income is, well, what do you think about it? Should it be part of this conversation about AI?
I can understand that it's part of the conversation, but what I've been noticing is that we tend to jump to the end of the line where all the jobs have been taken over, or many of the jobs have been taken over, and I want to appeal to everybody that there is stuff we can do before that. We can decide how we arrange our workplaces. We can decide what are we going to do with the people that are going to lose a job or part of their job to artificial intelligence. Are we going to dismiss those people? Or are we going to say, well, maybe we can try to create new business opportunities because people are valuable. And what people now tend to do is say, well, we are probably all going to lose our jobs, so let's talk about a universal basic income or robotax. But don't forget that we can do a lot already right now. I call this human in command. We can decide whether we want it in our lives, how we want it in our lives, how it's going to improve our job, our work, our capability. It doesn't have to overcome us. It doesn't have to overwhelm us.
Except haven't we seen this movie before around deindustrialization resulting in jobs that are worse jobs? They may not be physically worse jobs, but in terms of the standard of living they provide and the dignity associated with this standard of living, it's a story of decline. And I guess, and I will open this up again to everybody, I think what a lot of people are looking for when they ask about the good that can come from AI is a scenario where there are jobs that come from this technology that are as good or better than the jobs that are being lost.
Yeah, what you're referring to is the notion that dangerous, dull, and a little bit of a derogatory term, but dangerous, dull, and dumb jobs will be given to AI and robotics first, which is probably a good thing for society. The other thing we got to think about too is the world's changing as AI comes online more. So we have half the planet connected to the internet today. Within 7 to 10 years, we should have feasibly the entire planet connected. As we as citizens of the world start to get connected with each other, we will do commerce with each other as we add 5 billion more minds onto the internet in the next decade. And I think we will find ways to build commerce with each other. So as robots, if this was all a village and the robots and AI took our machine factory jobs, we probably would agree and start to work with each other as a village to be self-sufficient, to have different types of things that we barter, trade, or use in commerce. And that market for the commerce is about to get 7 billion strong. So yeah, I think there'll be AI and robotics that take away jobs in the current kind of industrial sector, but as the world opens up to the internet, I think a lot of us will figure out ways to import and export things on an individual basis that will make sense and make livelihood for people.
But let's talk more about that transition, because that's exactly the issue, is how you get from the present state to the kind of vision you're talking about. Those dumb, dangerous, and dull jobs are not ones that you would want or that I would want, but the people who have them are very attached to them, and the disappearance of them has, among other things, given us Donald Trump and Brexit. It tends to produce a very strong political reaction when you have that kind of transition without the end state being visible. So how do we manage it? Perhaps it's inevitable, but how do we manage it socially and politically?
Well, at least in the Netherlands, there is a good initiative between social partners, between workers and trade unions and representatives of business in the cleaning industry, where in the collective bargaining agreement, and I'm thinking that is quite different from the United States, but we do have a lot of collective bargaining agreements. It is implemented that there is going to be a strategy where cleaning workers are helped in doing their job by technology and by smart technology, and not replaced. So that is an agreement between social partners that is being made and being implemented. I think that is a good example of how to deal with also maybe if you want to call it a dirty job, how to deal with that as well. So it's to keep the people working, but have the robot or the machine do the heavy lifting and do the dirty work.
Yeah.
Yes, I think again, if we look into the history, then when we had the industrial revolution, then also the machines came and everything changed, and then the political response was in education. Actually, then the elementary schooling was made compulsory. It wasn't so before, because people needed new skills. When we look today, then I think the response should also be in education. But the problem is that artificial intelligence is taking away the jobs that need our cognitive skills, and so how to train people to compete with that, or to be able to work. And so far the studies have shown that the human robot or human artificial intelligence teams are 85% more productive or effective than either of them alone. So we need to think about working together with AI rather than being really afraid of that. But one other thing that I wanted to add is that when we look at the young people nowadays, then what we have to keep in mind is that everything we give away comes weaker in us. So when we gave away the physically hard jobs, what happens to us? That we are physically weaker than our ancestors were. Now we give away our cognitive skills.
What you forecast the same scenario?
Yeah.
We won't need our brains as much.
She's saying we'll become mush.
I don't forecast the same. Well, but there have been books written about this. It's funny that why we deal with the animal rights so much is that we treat them as minor, intelligent creatures, and now we feel that AI is taking over, and we are the ones who are really not intelligent enough. And so if we treat animals bad, they will treat us bad. And so let's treat animals good.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think about what we're teaching AI as it becomes superior to human intelligence at some point in the future. And if you think about a lot of the applications of AI, it's compete to win, beat someone in chess, beat someone in Jeopardy, beat someone in Go. We're teaching it to beat us, to be competitive, and we're teaching it about greed, algorithms that run the financial markets. So there's kind of an interesting argument. I heard Modwat, who runs Google X in the UK, talk about this at the Wired conference last week. He spoke right before I did, and he brought up this interesting philosophy that just like kids watching their parents, and you learn from your parents in terms of how to act, we're kind of teaching AI as it observes us as a society in terms of our cultural norms, in terms of compete to win, greed, selfishness. And we should probably rethink how do we raise this new child into the world to where it's more aligned with accretive cultural norms to where what we want to be, like be happy. And AI thinks the way we're happy now is to beat someone and to take over financial markets.
Yeah. Well, Kaja and Catelijne both have a sort of European vision of this where you can direct the technology to a high degree in a socially positive, socially constructive way. The American vision is somewhat different from that and is much more market directed in terms of what drives the technology and what outcomes it produces, right?
Yeah, that's the whole existence at Xprize. You know, we're a nonprofit, but we have an AI Xprize that we're doing with IBM. It's a global competition. We announced it on the TED stage last year. Last year with the United Nations in Geneva, we had an AI for Good summit. It was the first of its kind. We had a very big summit we had last year. We had all the AI community come together to talk about AI for good. And what we're hoping to do is we think through incentive competition models that we can get all those AI experts that are going to be wired to think about how to use AI for commercial gain. That's just a given. That's where the mass market will take it. The invisible hand of capitalism will drive entrepreneurs to use AI to create neat things that sell well so they can have a nice exit. Fact. So can we use, as a nonprofit, can we put an incentive competition together that gets all of you as an AI experts working on commercial products? During the day, can you spend your nights and weekends on the AI Xprize, keep all your intellectual property if you do well, but we'll incentivize you to use your excess capacity, your 10% of your nights and weekends to actually try to solve a grand challenge facing humanity using AI. And I really don't think I think unless you gamify innovation in that way and use behavioral science incentive structures to draw that out of the market that's currently working on commercial efforts, first thing, you get the A team involved. You get the A players that are out there really progressing AI for commercial purposes, but you get them to spend their excess capacity to try to solve big challenges. I mean, that's our theory of change at Xprize in terms of how we crowdsource that wisdom of the world, particularly in a domain like AI.
George and Anthony, do you think we can direct AI in the social direction that we would like to see it go?
You know, I do actually. I think that right now, the way that we have been designing AI is to substitute for what we as humans use our cortex for, how to think through problems. The way our cortex is designed is you set it on a goal, regardless of what that goal is, and it's the job of the cortex to figure out how to realize that goal. And right now, that's been the challenge in AI. But setting the goals is actually not done at the level of the sort of outer layer of your brain. It's set by deeper layers of your brain that sort of set your moral compass, that make you feel good when you help someone, hopefully. And those are the sorts of next level challenges that I think that we might potentially start thinking about building into AI. Figuring out how to sort of put make the AI feel good by helping other people. Hopefully not so much by helping itself. I'd like to have altruistic AI. Yeah.
I think when you focus on some of the key challenges that are in front of, like just some of these work use cases that I mentioned earlier, I think you can find all kinds of good use for AI, right? So I'll give you two examples of this. When we went into the roofing sector and started to work with commercial roofers and a number of the insurance carriers that covered damage when big weather events occurred, it turns out that when a big weather event occurs in any place in the United States or any place in the world, it is just not possible to get as many people to cover the actual assessment on the claim itself for, say for instance, roof damage for hail. When you can build an AI that instead of having that roof damage be manually covered by someone climbing a roof, taking a 10 by 10 measurement, going back to the home office, and 2 weeks later coming up with what the assessment of the damage is, versus a drone flying overhead, creating a full topology of coverage, and then within literally 15 minutes having a dimensional analysis as well as the hail structure understood and automated. It starts to actually drive the productivity of both the person who's governing that damage, but also a better customer experience. And so this example was fascinating because when we got into these superstorms this past year, it turns out that most hail damage was actually not covered in an automated way. You had to, rely on this manual coverage, and in most cases, you didn't even get to the roofs that really needs to be covered that had damage. And now we can get to 100% coverage. So there's examples here where you can either augment the human potential by just getting more work accomplished and driving that productivity for good, or you can extend the work life of someone who typically would have retired out of the workforce because you have an AI assisting the way that work gets accomplished. We look for those use cases. We look for those cases where we can actually augment the human potential versus displacing work or destroying work.
All right, here's a quiz question for all of you. Next year, 2018, is the 200th anniversary of a book that's very relevant to our discussion. Who knows? This is a non-Watson question. This is a trivia question.
Year 2000.
Well,
it was also written in...
I'm thinking of something that was published in 1818. Anyway, it's an unfair question. The book is Frankenstein. It's the first science fiction novel, of course, written by a woman, and that is the beginning of, in a way, the fear of AI. Right? What is Frankenstein? He's a monster created in a laboratory who's not supposed to have a will of his own, but turns out to have one and ends up being tremendously destructive. By the way, if you haven't reread it recently, it is such a good book. It's the only book that scared my children so much that they begged me to stop reading it to them. That's what a good novel it is. But it's the beginning of this vision, and I think when we talk about the fear and negativity about AI, a lot of this is this idea, machines having a mind of their own. Is that fantasy or is it reality?
Right.
I see Marcus has his hand up, so you can start.
The thing that I think is going to scare people more, which you already feel this happening, is it's really a pace of change. It's a pace of change fear more than anything. I mean, we adjusted to AI beating a chess player, and people didn't freak out when it finally went and beat a Jeopardy player because there was a 20 or 30-year period in between the two. You're going to see those types of advancements in AI in the matter of months, not decades. And I think that's going to scare people. When you have this, it's an exponential technology. We're all wired to think linear. So when you start to see exponential trends and you think linear about them, it starts to really reshape your notion of reality. And governments start to get freaked out about it because they have standardized processes. They have less agile or adaptability mechanisms in their government. So you see things happening like self-driving cars. Oh no, what do we do? And the next thing you know, there's vertical takeoff and landing cars that happen. It's just too much change for the system to absorb. And I think that's probably the biggest. I mean, you can get into the shiny object syndrome of AI, what it's going to destroy, what it's going to do good. And you can do that all day long. I think the bigger thing that governments should start to think about is how do we put in not regulatory framework. That's actually the reverse vocabulary you should be using when you talk about exponential technologies. But how do we make it? How do we make an agile, adaptable society, both cultural norms as well as operationally, to adjust with such a pace of change that we just have never experienced before? Because you get into freak-out mode as things start to change too quickly on you.
Yeah. Anyone else have a comment on Frankenstein scenario? Then I have one last question for everybody.
No, I think the fears, people have fears, and it's, the fears will not go away when you say that don't be afraid. You have to really understand their fears. But I think that the attitude towards technology is also, when we look at the policy side, it's very much, as a joke from another book, Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. So they divide people into three, basically how they treat technology. Everything that was there before you were born is part of the nature, should be there, is like logical.
Yeah.
Everything that was created or invented before you became 35 is modern, very revolutionary, should be taken into use. And everything that was invented after you were 35 goes against the nature, should be abolished, should not be allowed. And now if you think about the average age of a policy worker, then it's not less than 35.
That's so true. You said it's so true.
It's funny, that's how I feel about Snapchat sometimes.
You'll never, we're too old to ever really understand it or appreciate
Still don't get it.
So here's a last question, and it's what AI development are you most excited about that will take place over the next 10 years? Bill Gates always used to say that people overestimate how much change we get in 5 years, but underestimate how much change we get in 10 years. So for technology, 10 years is a lot happens in 10 years. What is the thing that you are most looking forward to coming out of AI? Anyone can start. We don't have to go in order.
So it's interesting for us. We look at some of the work that's happening, particularly when it comes to computer vision, as an area that's incredible right now. Because it used to be that you had this sort of disconnect between what a machine could understand and recognize and what a human can understand and recognize. And now you're starting to see these applications emerge where the machines with computer vision can actually understand real space in a meaningful way that you just couldn't handle before with computational algorithmic
And better than
work.
humans.
And better than humans, right? And faster than humans. So I think the new set of applications that are going to emerge in this next half a decade around computer vision are going to be outrageous.
Any order? Yeah.
Just what I hope for is to find solutions to unsolved problems. That's very general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with machine translation and the potentially transformative effect that can have. I can now read newspapers in Chinese, even though, and that's really been in the last year or two. I can actually read, online newspapers. I can actually have, at least in a quiet setting, a conversation with someone who speaks only Chinese. And that, I think, is transformative.
Damn it, you just stole mine. But anyway, good answer. Yeah, do you have...
Well, I would love to see AI take over the dangerous and dull jobs and dull work from people, and then keep those people in that job doing more interesting work and more creative work. I'm just hoping it can enhance us. And for me personally, what would be wonderful if there is an AI that can make some sort of summary of all the documents that I have to read during the day and tell it to me in my ear just in about a few seconds. That would be wonderful.
You need an editor. Those are the last people to be replaced by AI. We can't be replaced. We're very necessary. Marcus, do you have one?
So what do you say, 10 years?
Yeah.
Well, so 10 years we should be full-blown into quantum computing or DNA computing, some form of computing that takes over the integrated circuit as its next evolution of computing format. And so if AI today can ride Moore's law into the integrated circuit to be as powerful as it is, coming after a history of electromechanical computers to relay to vacuum tubes to the integrated circuit, as we get to the next X curve of technology around computing, which will most likely be quantum computing, which you're hearing a lot about now, that's not a tenfold improvement over current computing. That's millions of folds improvement over current computing. So that basis and that infrastructure to run AI will be something we see within the next decade.
And what is the consumer technology that comes out of that? I mean, that's a basic innovation, but what will we see? What kinds of changes will we see as a result of that?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know is an eloquent last word for this panel. But please join me in thanking this terrific group. Okay.